Welcome to Empire and Ember Stories, where every throne is built from ambition, every empire is tested by betrayal, and even the most powerful rulers eventually learned that darkness always collects its debts. They called him the king long before anyone dared to say the title in his presence. Not because he wore a crown, not because he inherited a kingdom, and certainly not because anyone had chosen him. He became the king because, in a city where everyone wanted power, he was the one man patient enough to wait for it. His real name was Adrian Vale, though that name had almost disappeared from the streets. To politicians, businessmen, nightclub owners, lawyers, and men who preferred conversations behind locked doors, he was simply Vale. To those who worked beneath him, he was the king. And to those foolish enough to oppose him, he was usually the last mistake they made. But Adrian Vale had never ruled alone. Every king had advisors. Every king had soldiers. Every king had men willing to lie, threaten, and die in exchange for money, protection, or the illusion of belonging to something greater than themselves. Adrian had all of those, but only one person stood beside his throne rather than beneath it. Her name was Elena Voss. The city called her the Queen of Shadows. No one could agree on where the name began. Some claimed she had once walked unseen through the guarded home of one of Adrian's enemies and left behind nothing but a black rose on his desk. Others insisted she knew every secret whispered in the city's expensive restaurants before dessert arrived. There were rumors that judges feared her, that businessmen paid fortunes merely to keep their names from appearing in her private files, and that men who underestimated her often discovered too late that Elena never needed to raise her voice to destroy them. Most of those stories were exaggerated. The truth was worse. Elena understood people. She understood what they loved, what they feared, what they wanted to hide, and what they were willing to sacrifice to protect the image they showed the world. Adrian controlled territory. Elena controlled information. And together, they had built an empire that stretched through the city like roots beneath concrete. On the surface, their world looked respectable. Restaurants, hotels, entertainment companies, construction firms, private clubs where the city's wealthy gathered beneath golden lights and pretended money had washed them clean. Their headquarters stood on the top floor of the Ember Tower, a black glass building overlooking the river. From Adrian's office, the city looked almost peaceful. Thousands of windows glowed beneath the night sky. Cars moved through streets like streams of red and white light. Bridges crossed the dark river. Church bells sounded in old neighborhoods, while music spilled from crowded bars downtown. From that height, everything seemed small enough to control. Adrian knew better. Cities were never controlled. They were negotiated with. Every district had ambitions. Every family carried grudges. Every loyal man had a price, even if that price was not money. And every empire contained the seed of its own destruction. Elena entered his office shortly after midnight. Adrian did not look away from the window. "You're late," he said. "I'm alive," Elena answered. "You should appreciate the difference." A faint smile appeared on Adrian's face. Only Elena could speak to him that way. She crossed the room in a dark suit, her footsteps nearly silent against the polished floor. There was no jewelry around her neck, no unnecessary display of wealth. Elena had never believed power required decoration. She placed a thin folder on Adrian's desk. He finally turned. "What is it? A problem?" "We have many. This one believes it's an opportunity." Adrian opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of Marcus Dane. Young, wealthy, charming. Marcus belonged to a new generation of ambitious men who believed the old rules no longer applied to them. His family had made a fortune in shipping and real estate. He had spent several years expanding that fortune through aggressive acquisitions, political friendships, and an ability to turn enemies into partners just long enough to replace them. He was 36 years old and already dangerous. Not because he was stronger than Adrian, because he was hungry. Adrian studied the photograph. "He wants the Eastern District." "He already has pieces of it," Elena said. "That isn't possible." Elena gave him a look. Adrian closed the folder. Nothing irritated him more than discovering that something he considered impossible had already happened. How? 3 smaller groups changed their loyalties over the last 6 weeks. And no one told us. They told someone. That someone decided not to tell us. Adrian's expression changed. There it was. Not fear. Not anger. Something colder. Betrayal. An enemy outside the walls was expected. An enemy inside them was unforgivable. Who? Adrian asked. I don't know yet. That answer mattered. Elena almost always knew. Adrian walked toward the desk and poured himself a glass of water. People imagine men like Adrian spent their nights drinking expensive whiskey while discussing violence. Adrian rarely drank. He considered intoxication a voluntary surrender of awareness, and he had survived too long to surrender anything voluntarily. How much does Dane know? He asked. Enough to move confidently. Then someone close to us is feeding him information. Yes. Can we contain it? Elena paused. I don't know. For the first time that night, Adrian looked concerned. Their empire had survived police investigations, political changes, economic crashes, rival organizations, scandals, and wars between ambitious men. But information was different. Information ignored walls. It crossed borders without permission. One secret in the wrong hands could accomplish what 100 enemies could not. Elena moved toward the window. When we built this, she said, looking down at the city, we were surrounded by people who had nowhere else to go. Adrian understood immediately. Their earliest followers had not joined because Adrian was wealthy. He had not been wealthy. They followed because he had protected them when no one else would. Loyalty had been born from survival. Now things were different. Young men entered the organization wearing expensive watches. Executives discussed numbers instead of loyalty. People who had never struggled believed the empire existed simply because powerful people had decided it should. They had forgotten the years of fear. The years when Adrian slept in changing locations. The years when Elena carried entire networks of contacts in her memory because keeping records was too dangerous. Success had created comfort. Comfort had created distance. And distance was where betrayal grew. Then remind them, Adrian said. Elena turned toward him. Of what? Why this empire exists? She studied his face. That isn't what you're really thinking. Adrian remained silent. Elena knew him too well. He was thinking about punishment. Not merely for the traitor. For everyone. Fear was the oldest tool of kings. But Elena understood something Adrian sometimes forgot. Fear created obedience. It did not create loyalty. You built this empire because people believed you were different from the men who came before you, she said. They believed I would win. No, they believed you wouldn't sacrifice them just to prove you were powerful. Adrian's eyes hardened. You think I've become weak? I think you're angry. Someone is selling pieces of our empire. And if you punish everyone because you don't know who betrayed you, then Marcus Dane wins without entering this building. Adrian stared at her. These were dangerous words. Anyone else speaking them would have been removed from the room, perhaps permanently. But Elena was not anyone else. She had stood beside Adrian before the towers, before the money, before men lowered their voices when they said his name. She had earned the right to tell him the truth. And sometimes the truth was the only thing powerful men could no longer afford to hear. Adrian turned back toward the city. Find the traitor. I will. And Dane, let him believe he's winning. That finally caught Adrian's attention. Elena smiled slightly. People reveal themselves when they believe the danger has passed. 3 days later, Marcus Dane hosted a charity gala at the Imperial Museum. The city's elite filled the marble halls. Politicians arrived beside actors. Bankers laughed with journalists. Wealthy families posed beneath enormous chandeliers while cameras flashed. Marcus moved among them effortlessly. He wore confidence like another tailored suit. To the public, he was a philanthropist, a rising businessman, a man promising to invest millions in neglected neighborhoods. And perhaps part of him even believed that story. That was the strange thing about ambitious people. They rarely considered themselves villains. They simply developed excellent reasons why everything they wanted was necessary. Elena attended the gala alone. When she entered the museum, conversations changed. Not stopped. Changed. People noticed her without appearing to notice her. Marcus approached with a smile. Elena Voss. Marcus Dane. I was beginning to think the king never allowed his queen outside the castle. Elena smiled politely. Kings who try to control queens don't stay kings for very long. Marcus laughed. He liked her immediately. That made him careless. I've wanted to meet you. You could have requested a meeting. I prefer neutral ground. There is no neutral ground. Marcus lifted his glass. I've heard that about you. And yet here you are. They walked slowly through the gallery. Around them, donors admired paintings worth more than entire apartment buildings. Marcus spoke casually, but Elena listened to the spaces between his words. He wanted her to know he was informed. He mentioned developments in the East. A shipping company Adrian had quietly supported. A political relationship that had not been publicly disclosed. A private disagreement between two senior members of Adrian's organization. Each detail was deliberate. Marcus was demonstrating reach. Elena allowed him to continue. Eventually, he stopped beside a large painting of a medieval coronation. A king sat beneath a golden canopy while nobles knelt before him. Marcus smiled at the image. Interesting tradition, he said. What is? Crowns. Elena looked at him. They make power visible. They also make the person wearing them easier to identify. Marcus laughed again. I understand why Adrian keeps you close. Do you? I think so. You don't. His smile weakened slightly. Elena continued walking. Marcus followed. Tell Adrian something for me. I don't carry messages. Then consider this conversation. She stopped. Marcus lowered his voice. The city is changing. Old organizations disappear because they mistake history for ownership. Adrian built something extraordinary, but nothing lasts forever. Elena watched him carefully. And you believe you're the future? I believe the future belongs to whoever recognizes it first. Elena looked around the museum. At the marble statues. At the portraits of dead rulers. At the names of wealthy donors carved into stone. Every generation thinks it invented ambition, she said. Then it ends up hanging on a museum wall. Marcus's smile disappeared. For the first time that evening, Elena saw what lived beneath his confidence. Pride. Not greed. Not desperation. Pride. Marcus did not simply want Adrian's empire. He wanted Adrian to know that he had taken it. That distinction told Elena almost everything she needed. She left the gala 20 minutes later. By sunrise, Adrian knew Marcus's weakness. He wants recognition, Elena explained. They sat in a private dining room above one of Adrian's oldest restaurants. The restaurant had not changed much in 20 years. Same wooden tables. Same faded photographs along the walls. Adrian liked coming here because nothing in the room treated him like a king. He wants more than territory, Elena continued. He wants your acknowledgement. Adrian drank coffee. Then he's a child. Children can still burn houses down. Adrian nodded. Who is feeding him information? We're getting closer. How close? Elena placed 3 photographs on the table. Victor Hale, Samuel Rook, Daniel Mercer. All 3 were senior figures inside Adrian's organization. Victor managed business relationships. Samuel oversaw security. Daniel had worked beside Adrian for nearly 15 years and handled much of the organization's financial administration. Adrian looked at their faces. 3 possibilities. Victor wouldn't betray me. Elena said nothing. Adrian noticed. You disagree. I don't trust certainty. I saved his life. People don't always remember favors the way the person giving them remembers. Adrian leaned back. What about Samuel? He owes money. How much? Enough to become frightened. And Daniel? Elena hesitated. He's been asking questions. What kind? Questions about succession. The room became still. Adrian slowly placed his cup down. Succession. Empires hated that word. Every powerful ruler eventually faced the same uncomfortable truth. One day the throne would be empty. Adrian had no children, no official heir, no announced successor. For years, that ambiguity had protected him. Anyone openly planning for life after Adrian risked appearing disloyal. But Adrian was no longer young. He had survived more than most men expected, and people had begun wondering what would happen when he did not. Daniel thinks I'm dying? Adrian asked. He thinks everyone dies. So do I. But you don't talk about it. Adrian's expression darkened. Maybe I should. Elena looked at him. Maybe. That evening Adrian summoned the 3 men separately. Victor arrived first. Tall, silver-haired, confident. He denied everything. Samuel came next. He looked exhausted. When Adrian asked about his debts, Samuel's face lost its color. But fear was not guilt. At least not always. Daniel arrived last. He entered the room without hesitation. Of the 3 men, Daniel had known Adrian longest. They had survived the early years together, shared cheap meals, slept in warehouses during conflicts with larger organizations. Daniel had once carried an injured Adrian through an alley while sirens echoed nearby. Those memories made suspicion painful. That was why betrayal by strangers was easy. Betrayal by family rewrote your past. Adrian asked him directly. Have you been speaking with Marcus Dane? No. Have you spoken to anyone associated with him? Probably. Half the city is associated with him somehow. Don't play with words. Daniel stared at Adrian. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Daniel said something unexpected. You've changed. Adrian's jaw tightened. That isn't an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Explain. Daniel looked around the office. When we started, you listened. I still listen. No. You wait for silence. Adrian stood. Most men would have stepped backward. Daniel did not. We were brothers once, Daniel said. We still are. Brothers don't need appointments to speak. Something moved behind Adrian's eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or memory. Daniel continued. People are afraid of you now. They should be. No. Enemies should be afraid of you. Your own people should believe in you. Adrian remembered Elena saying almost the same thing. That made him angrier. Did you betray me? Daniel's voice became quiet. No. Then why are you asking about succession? Because no one else has the courage. Silence. Daniel took a breath. This empire can't depend on one man forever. Adrian walked toward him. And you think that man should be you? Daniel's eyes widened. Then he laughed. Not mockingly. Sadly. That is exactly the problem. What? You can't imagine someone asking about the future without wanting your throne. Adrian stared at him. Daniel shook his head. I don't want your chair. I want to know whether everything we built disappears when you're gone. He turned and walked toward the door. Adrian could have stopped him. He didn't. Before leaving, Daniel looked back. The city used to call you Adrian. The door closed. For several minutes, Adrian remained alone. A king in a silent room. Surrounded by expensive furniture. Guarded by loyal men. Protected by money, influence, and reputation. And somehow more isolated than he had ever been when he owned almost nothing. That night Elena found him in the old neighborhood. He stood outside an abandoned apartment building where he had lived as a teenager. Rain fell softly. You disappeared, she said. You found me. I always do. They looked at the building. Several windows were broken. Graffiti covered the lower walls. Adrian remembered his mother carrying groceries up those stairs. He remembered cold winters when the heating failed. He remembered listening to arguments through thin walls and promising himself that one day no landlord, creditor, politician, employer, or powerful man would ever control his life again. That promise had shaped him, then consumed him. Do you remember the first night we met? Adrian asked. Elena smiled. You threatened me. You stole from me. You deserved it. He laughed quietly. It had been years since Elena heard that sound. You took my entire envelope. You left it unattended. There were 12 men in the room. 12 apparently useless men. Adrian smiled. Then the smile disappeared. Daniel says I've changed. You have. You don't hesitate. You didn't keep me around for comfort. Adrian looked at her. Why did you stay? Elena considered the question. No one had asked her that in years. At first, yes. Because you were useful. Adrian laughed. And later, Elena looked toward the rain. Because you believed power could protect people. Could. You started believing power was the thing that needed protecting. The words landed harder than any accusation. Adrian turned away. Across the street, a mother hurried beneath an umbrella while holding a child's hand. A bus passed. Someone shouted from a balcony. Life continued. The city did not care about kings. I can't become weak, Adrian said. Elena stepped closer. Then don't. You think mercy is strength? No. I think knowing the difference between mercy and fear is strength. Adrian looked at her. You've been waiting years to say that. I've been saying it for years. He almost smiled. Then Elena's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed immediately. What? We found something. They returned to Ember Tower before midnight. Elena's team had discovered a pattern. Information leaked to Marcus Dane was accurate, but selective. Only certain meetings, certain investments, certain internal disagreements. The source had access to high-level discussions, but not Adrian's most protected communications. That eliminated Samuel. His position gave him extensive security knowledge, but not all of the financial details Marcus had referenced. Victor remained possible. Daniel remained possible. Then Elena noticed something else. Every leak benefited Victor. Not obviously. That would have been foolish. But consistently, a rival executive lost influence. A deal moved away from one company and toward another. A political relationship weakened, creating an opportunity Victor later used. Each leak damaged Adrian's empire slightly while strengthening Victor's private position. Elena presented the evidence. Adrian stared at it for a long time. I said he wouldn't betray me. You were wrong. Adrian hated those words. But there was no satisfaction in Elena's voice. Only certainty. Bring him. Victor arrived an hour later. This time there was no confident smile. He knew. Men always knew when the room had changed. Adrian sat behind his desk. Elena stood near the window. Victor looked between them. You've already decided, he said. Adrian placed several documents on the desk. You spoke with Dane. Victor remained silent. You gave him information. Still nothing. Adrian's voice hardened. Why? Victor finally laughed. A small, bitter sound. Why does everyone always ask that after they've ignored the answer for years? Adrian watched him. Victor stepped forward. You built an empire and then froze it in place. No one rises unless you allow it. No one makes a decision without wondering what Adrian Vale will think. You call it loyalty. What do you call it? A cage. You became wealthy in that cage. Victor's expression twisted. There it is. What? You think money is the same as respect? Adrian's eyes narrowed. Victor continued. Marcus offered something you never would. My throne. A future. Elena spoke for the first time. No. He offered you importance. Victor turned toward her. She continued. You didn't betray Adrian because the system was broken. You betrayed him because you wanted to feel bigger inside it. Victor said nothing. That silence was confession enough. Adrian stood. For years, people had whispered stories about what happened to those who betrayed the king. Some stories were true. Others had grown with each retelling. Victor expected punishment. He could see it in Adrian's face. But Adrian was thinking about something Daniel had said. Enemies should fear you. Your own people should believe in you. Adrian walked around the desk. Victor's breathing changed. Look at me, Adrian said. Victor did. You wanted a future? Victor swallowed. Yes. You have one. Confusion appeared on his face. Adrian continued. But not here. Victor stared at him. Elena did too. You're letting me leave? I am removing you from everything we built. You think I won't talk? Adrian stepped closer. I think everyone in this city will know you betrayed one king for another. Victor's face changed. Adrian's voice became calm. And ambitious men may forgive greed. They may forgive failure. They may even forgive enemies. But they rarely trust traitors. Victor finally understood. Adrian was not giving him freedom. He was giving him consequences. A future where every person he approached would wonder when he might betray them too. Victor was escorted from the building. Elena waited until the doors closed. That was unexpected. Disappointed. Interested. Adrian returned to his desk. Marcus wanted me angry. Yes. He expected retaliation. Yes. So we disappoint him. Elena smiled. There you are. Adrian looked at her. Where? The man who waits. Marcus Dane heard about Victor's removal the following morning. He was furious. Not because Victor had been exposed. That possibility had always existed. Because Adrian had refused to react predictably. Marcus had expected violence. Violence created fear. Fear created instability. Instability created opportunities. Instead, Adrian had made Victor useless. No public spectacle. No war. No chaos. Marcus's strategy began to collapse. Then something worse happened. People started leaving him. Not dramatically. Quietly. A businessman delayed a partnership. A politician canceled a private meeting. 2 investors suddenly became unavailable. A neighborhood leader who had promised support changed his mind. Marcus did not understand. Elena did. Marcus had built momentum from the impression that Adrian was weakening. But power depended partly on belief. When Adrian exposed a traitor without losing control, the story changed. The king had known. The king had survived. The king was still standing. And perhaps most importantly, the king had not burned the city merely to prove that he could. Marcus began making mistakes. He demanded loyalty instead of earning it. He pushed allies for commitments they were not ready to make. He interpreted caution as betrayal. Every day, he became more suspicious. Every night, his circle became smaller. Elena watched from a distance. Don't touch him, she told Adrian. I haven't. Keep not touching him. You enjoy this. I enjoy impatient men defeating themselves. Adrian looked amused. You think he'll collapse? No. Her answer surprised him. Then what? He'll come for you directly. 3 weeks later, he did. Marcus requested a meeting. No intermediaries. No conditions. Adrian accepted. They met after midnight in the top-floor restaurant of an unfinished hotel overlooking the harbor. The room was empty except for a long table. Adrian arrived with Elena. Marcus arrived alone. That was deliberate. He wanted to appear fearless. Adrian recognized the performance because he had performed similar acts when he was younger. Marcus sat across from them. For several seconds no one spoke. Finally Marcus smiled. You know what I admire about you? Adrian leaned back. Your ability to begin conversations with yourself? Marcus ignored the insult. You understand theater. I understand people. Same thing. Elena watched Marcus closely. He looked tired. Not weak, but pressured. His perfect confidence had begun cracking. I offered Victor a better future, Marcus said. You offered him a mirror, Elena replied. Marcus glanced at her. He wanted to see himself as powerful. And you showed him what he wanted. Isn't that leadership? No, that's seduction. Marcus smiled. Adrian said nothing. Marcus finally turned toward him. The East is still changing. Everything changes. You can't hold it forever. I don't need forever. Marcus leaned forward. Then what do you want? Adrian considered the question. Years earlier, the answer would have been simple. Everything. Every street. Every business. Every enemy defeated. Every door opened. Every person who once ignored him forced to know his name. But now, he looked at Elena, then back at Marcus. I want what I built to survive me. Marcus smiled slowly. So Daniel got to you. That sentence changed the room. Adrian did not move. Elena's eyes sharpened. Marcus realized his mistake immediately. Daniel's conversation with Adrian had been private. Only 3 people knew the details. Adrian, Daniel, and Elena, unless someone had been listening. Marcus tried to recover. I hear things. Elena stood. Marcus watched her. She walked toward the window. You hear too much. Adrian remained calm. How did you know what Daniel said? Marcus shrugged. This city talks. No, Adrian replied. People talk. Cities remember. Marcus said nothing. Adrian understood now. Victor had not been the only leak. He had merely been the obvious one. Someone else remained inside. Someone with access closer than Victor ever had. The realization spread through the room like cold air. Marcus smiled. The confidence had returned. There, he said softly. Now you understand. Adrian looked at Elena. She was already thinking. Reviewing conversations. Locations. Meetings. Patterns. Marcus stood. You built a remarkable empire, Adrian. But the problem with building something around trust is eventually everyone learns how valuable trust is. He walked toward the exit. Adrian's voice stopped him. You came here to tell me? Marcus turned. No. Then why? Marcus smiled. To make you wonder. He left. And that was exactly what he accomplished. For the next several days, suspicion infected Ember Tower. Every conversation felt different. Every familiar face became a possibility. Adrian began noticing details he had ignored before. Who arrived early? Who left late? Who asked questions? Who avoided questions? The empire continued functioning. But trust had been damaged. Not by evidence. By uncertainty. Elena saw what Marcus was doing. He wants us hunting ghosts, she said. Adrian paced inside his office. What if there is another traitor? There may be. You don't sound concerned. I am concerned about what suspicion is turning you into. Adrian stopped. You heard him. I did. He knew about Daniel. Yes. So someone told him. Or he learned another way. How? I don't know yet. Adrian laughed without humor. You keep saying that. Elena's expression changed. She approached him slowly. You think it's me? Adrian said nothing. Silence answered for him. Elena looked at him for a long time. Years seemed to pass in those seconds. Every fight. Every victory. Every night they had survived together. Every secret she had protected. Every person she had refused to betray. And now Adrian looked at her with the same suspicion he gave everyone else. So that's his victory, Elena said. I didn't accuse you. You didn't have to. Elena. No. Her voice remained quiet. That made it worse. I stood beside you when your entire empire fit inside 2 rooms above a closed bakery. I know. I watched friends disappear because they decided your future wasn't worth the risk. I know. I stayed when leaving would have been easier. I know. Then why are you looking at me like that? Adrian could not answer. Because Marcus had done exactly what Elena warned about. He had made Adrian afraid. Not afraid of losing money. Not afraid of losing territory. Afraid of losing control. And fear had turned every relationship into a question. Elena walked toward the door. If you can't trust me, there is nothing left for me to protect. She left. For the first time in 20 years, Adrian Vale stood inside his empire without Elena Voss beside him. The city felt colder. Hours passed. Then morning. Adrian did not sleep. Daniel found him shortly after sunrise. "You look terrible." "Thank you." Daniel poured coffee. Elena left. Adrian looked at him. "How do you know?" "She called me." Suspicion appeared instantly. Daniel saw it. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed. Adrian stared at him. "You think this is funny?" "No. I think Marcus Dane has turned the most intelligent man I've ever known into an idiot." Adrian almost became angry. Then he stopped. Daniel sat across from him. "Think." "I am thinking." "No. You're reacting." The word struck him. Daniel continued. "Marcus mentioned our conversation." "What?" "To prove he had another source." "Maybe." "What else?" "To make you doubt Elena." Adrian remained silent. Daniel leaned forward. "If Marcus truly had someone closer than Victor, why reveal it?" Adrian's eyes changed. Daniel nodded. "There he is." Adrian stood. Marcus had not come to the meeting to demonstrate power. He had come to plant suspicion. The statement about Daniel had been bait. But how had he known? Elena had said Marcus liked recognition. He displayed information. He wanted enemies to know when he possessed an advantage. Yet during the meeting, the information about Daniel had slipped out too casually. Perhaps Marcus did not have another source. Perhaps Victor had learned about the conversation before his removal. Perhaps someone overheard a fragment. Perhaps Marcus knew only enough to gamble. And Adrian had completed the rest himself. That was the danger of fear. It rarely needed the full truth. Only a convincing beginning. "Where is Elena?" Adrian asked. Daniel smiled. "Figure it out." Adrian found her at the river. There was an old pedestrian bridge near the southern district where Elena sometimes went when she needed to think. She stood against the railing watching cargo ships move through the gray morning. Adrian approached alone. She did not turn. "You were right," he said. "That doesn't narrow it down." Despite everything, he smiled. "He was manipulating me." "I know." "You knew?" "I suspected." "And you still left." Elena finally faced him. Because Marcus wasn't the real problem. Adrian understood. He was. More precisely, his fear was. "I doubted you." "Yes." "I shouldn't have." "No." Adrian had apologized perhaps 5 times in his adult life. None had been easy. This one was hardest. "I'm sorry." Elena studied him, then looked back toward the river. "Do you know why kingdoms collapse?" Adrian sighed. "I suspect you're about to tell me. They become more interested in preserving power than preserving purpose." "And what was our purpose?" Elena turned. "You tell me." Adrian looked across the city. He remembered the neighborhood, the cold apartment, his mother counting money at the kitchen table, the first men who followed him not because he paid well, but because he kept his word, the businesses they protected from predators before becoming powerful enough to resemble predators themselves. The people who once believed Adrian Vale meant stability. Somewhere along the way, survival had turned into expansion. Expansion had turned into control. Control had turned into identity. The empire was no longer something Adrian possessed. It was what he believed he was. And that meant losing it felt like losing himself. "We wanted to build something no one could take from us," he said. Elena nodded. "And did we?" "Yes." "Then why are you still acting like the hungry man you were 20 years ago?" Adrian had no answer. Sometimes victory was recognizing the war had ended. Sometimes failure was continuing to fight because you no longer knew who you were without battle. "What do we do about Marcus?" Adrian asked. Elena's expression softened slightly. "We let him see the future he wanted." Within a month, Adrian did something no one expected. He announced structural changes across his organization. Responsibilities were distributed. Longtime leaders received greater independence. Financial interests were separated from personal control. Daniel was placed in charge of a council responsible for long-term continuity. Samuel received help resolving the pressure that had made him vulnerable. Several younger leaders were promoted based on ability rather than personal closeness to Adrian. And Elena? Elena received something she had never requested. Public recognition. Not as Adrian's advisor. Not as the mysterious woman behind the throne. As an equal partner. The city reacted immediately. Some believed Adrian was preparing to retire. Others said the king had become weak. Marcus Dane believed both. He moved quickly. Too quickly. He attempted to gather everyone dissatisfied with Adrian's changes. But something had shifted. People who once considered betrayal because they feared having no future now had futures inside the empire. Managers had authority. Partners had ownership. Younger members had paths upward. Adrian had done something Marcus never expected. He had surrendered a portion of control to preserve the whole. A king willing to loosen his grip was harder to overthrow than a king clutching the throne with both hands. Marcus's coalition began disappearing. Without dissatisfaction to exploit, he was left with ambition alone. And ambition, without loyalty, was surprisingly lonely. Months passed. The Eastern District stabilized. Business relationships returned. Political allies stopped avoiding Adrian. Marcus remained wealthy. Still influential. Still dangerous. But the myth surrounding him faded. He had challenged a king. And the king had changed instead of breaking. One winter evening, Marcus appeared unexpectedly at Ember Tower. Adrian agreed to see him. Elena joined them. Marcus looked different. Not defeated. Older. Perhaps ambition aged people faster than time. He sat across from them. "I misjudged you," Marcus said. Adrian smiled faintly. "Which one of us?" Marcus glanced at Elena. "Both." Elena poured tea. "That must be difficult for you." Marcus laughed. "I deserve that." He looked at Adrian. "You could have destroyed me." "Maybe. Why didn't you?" Adrian considered the question. "Because once I would have." Marcus waited. Adrian continued. "And I finally understood that becoming predictable is dangerous." Marcus nodded. "There are people who still want your empire. There always will be. And eventually someone will succeed." "Eventually?" Marcus seemed surprised by the answer. "You accept that?" Adrian looked toward the window. Snow had begun falling across the city. No empire lasts forever. Marcus smiled. "That's not what kings usually say. Most kings confuse permanence with greatness. And you don't." "Not anymore." Elena watched Adrian. He had changed. Not softened. There were still boundaries no one crossed. Still consequences for betrayal. Still enemies who feared his name. But fear was no longer the foundation. Marcus stood. "Then perhaps the rumors are true." "What rumors?" "That the king is preparing to leave his throne." Adrian smiled. Maybe the throne was the problem. Marcus walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned. "What happens to people like us when there's nothing left to conquer?" Elena answered. "You find out whether there was ever anything inside you besides hunger." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then left. Years later, people would tell different versions of Adrian Vale's story. Some would describe him as a criminal ruler who controlled half the city. Others would describe him as a businessman whose influence reached places ordinary people never saw. Some would swear he was ruthless. Others would remember debts forgiven, neighborhoods protected, businesses saved, and promises kept. History rarely agrees on powerful men. It simplifies them, turns contradictions into legends. But almost every version mentioned Elena Voss, the Queen of Shadows. Some said she had secretly controlled Adrian all along. Others claimed Adrian trusted her more than anyone alive. A few believed they were lovers. Others insisted theirs was something stranger and perhaps stronger than romance. Two people who had seen each other at their weakest and still chosen to stand together. The truth belonged only to them. One evening, many years after Marcus Dane first challenged the Empire, Adrian and Elena stood again inside the top floor of Ember Tower. The city had changed. New buildings filled the skyline. Old neighborhoods had transformed. Young leaders now managed organizations that once depended entirely on Adrian. Daniel had retired. Samuel had moved away. Marcus Dane had eventually abandoned his attempt to conquer Adrian's world and built a legitimate international company instead. Victor Hale had disappeared from importance, exactly as Elena predicted. And Adrian, the king, had become something rare. A ruler who survived long enough to become unnecessary. Elena stood beside him. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "What?" "Being feared." Adrian smiled. "Sometimes. I knew it." "What about you?" "Being feared is exhausting." "You were very good at it." "I was good at allowing people to frighten themselves." Adrian laughed. Below them, lights flickered across the city. "How many people still call you the Queen of Shadows?" he asked. "Enough." "You like it?" "I tolerate it." "You absolutely like it." Elena smiled. Perhaps she did. Adrian walked toward the old desk. He ran his hand across the wood. There had been a time when sitting behind that desk felt like victory. Then another time when leaving it felt impossible. Now it looked like furniture. That might have been the greatest victory of all. "Daniel once asked me what happens when I'm gone," Adrian said. Elena nodded. "I remember. I thought he wanted my throne." "You thought everyone wanted your throne." "Occupational hazard." No. Ego. Adrian looked offended. Elena smiled. He shook his head. You never changed. I changed plenty. You still enjoy correcting me. Some responsibilities are permanent. Adrian looked through the windows. Do you think we built something good? Elena took her time before answering. No. Adrian turned. She continued. I think we built something human. He waited. Parts of it were loyal. Parts were cruel. Parts were necessary. Parts were selfish. We protected people. We frightened people. We gave some people opportunities and took opportunities from others. Anyone who tells the story as purely good or purely evil will be lying. Adrian nodded slowly. And was it worth it? Elena looked at him. Was what worth it? Everything. The years. The enemies. The sacrifices. The sleepless nights. The friendships lost. The betrayal survived. The power gained. The pieces of themselves surrendered along the way. Elena walked toward the window. The answer depends on what you learned. Adrian smiled. Always a philosopher. Always avoiding simple questions. That too. They stood together in silence. And perhaps that was the final secret of the king and his queen of shadows. Their empire had never truly been the buildings. It had never been the money. It had never been the influence, the rumors, the powerful friends, or the frightened enemies. Those things were temporary. Their real empire was built from choices. The choice to trust when betrayal was possible. The choice to change when pride demanded stubbornness. The choice to share power when fear demanded control. The choice to remember where they came from after success made forgetting convenient. And most importantly, the choice to understand that strength was not the ability to hold everything forever. Sometimes strength was knowing what to release. Adrian Vale spent most of his life believing power meant never being at the mercy of another person. But power had isolated him. The tighter he held his empire, the more the empire held him. It was Elena who taught him that control and strength were not the same thing. A frightened king built walls. A confident king built successors. A frightened king silenced disagreement. A confident king listened even when the truth hurt. A frightened king demanded loyalty. A confident king created reasons for people to remain loyal. And a frightened king believed stepping away from the throne meant disappearing. Adrian eventually learned that the greatest rulers were not remembered because they occupied a throne forever. They were remembered because something remained standing after they left it. For Elena, the lesson was different. She had spent much of her life in shadows because shadows were safe. Visibility created vulnerability. Attachment created vulnerability. Love, trust, loyalty, hope. Every meaningful human connection opened a door through which pain could enter. Elena understood that better than anyone. She had built an identity around knowing everything while revealing almost nothing. Yet beside Adrian, she gradually discovered that being unseen was not always the same as being free. There were moments when secrecy protected her. There were others when it imprisoned her. Accepting her place beside Adrian publicly was not simply a change in organizational structure. It was Elena choosing to be known. Not completely. No one was ever going to know Elena Voss completely. Adrian joked that she probably kept secrets from herself. She never denied it. But she allowed the world to see enough. Enough to recognize that she had not spent decades standing behind a king. She had spent them standing beside one. And that difference mattered. The legends continued long after their era ended. Young people heard stories about the king and the queen of shadows and imagined glamour, luxury, influence, danger. They imagined private rooms filled with powerful people and midnight conversations that changed the future of the city. They imagined Adrian as fearless, Elena as untouchable. But legends rarely preserve the important parts. They forget the loneliness. They forget the cost of suspicion. They forget that every powerful decision affects people who never sit at the table where it is made. They forget that trust, once broken, may never return exactly as it was. They forget that ambition has an appetite that grows each time it is fed. And they forget that the person sitting on the throne is often more afraid of losing it than the people trying to take it. Marcus Dane understood that too late. Victor Hale understood it too late. Adrian nearly understood it too late. Perhaps that was why Elena had always been the most dangerous person among them. She was ambitious, certainly, but her ambition had limits. She knew what she wanted. People who know what they want can sometimes be satisfied. People who simply want more can never be. Years after Adrian stepped away from daily control, a young executive once asked Elena for advice. He had recently gained authority inside one of the companies that had grown from the old empire. He wanted to become powerful. He wanted respect. He wanted people to listen when he entered a room. Elena listened patiently. Then she asked him a question. If everyone in the room obeyed you tomorrow, what would you ask them to do? The young man had no answer. Elena smiled. Then you don't want power. You want the feeling of power. He never forgot the conversation. Neither did she. Because Adrian had once suffered from the same confusion. So had Marcus. So had Victor. The desire to feel powerful had destroyed more people than power itself. Real leadership was quieter. It meant accepting responsibility for consequences other people never saw. It meant hearing bad news without punishing the messenger. It meant allowing talented people to grow without fearing they would someday replace you. It meant understanding that loyalty purchased by fear lasted only until someone more frightening appeared. It meant remembering that respect could not be demanded into existence. Most of all, it meant recognizing that the purpose of an empire, a business, a family, a team, or even a life could not simply be survival. Survival was the beginning, not the destination. On Adrian's final night inside Ember Tower, he turned off the lights himself. No ceremony, no crowd, no speech. Elena waited near the elevator. Adrian looked around the office one last time. The desk, the shelves, the windows, the city beyond them. How many years? He asked. Too many. That's sentimental. Don't ruin the moment. He laughed. Then he removed a small silver key from his pocket. It opened an old drawer in the desk. Inside rested a photograph. Adrian pulled it out. Two young people stood outside a rundown building. Adrian was 20-something. Elena looked even younger. Neither wore expensive clothes. Neither looked powerful. Behind them hung the faded sign of the bakery above which their first office had been located. Adrian handed Elena the photograph. We look terrible. You look terrible. You stole my coat. It looked better on me. They smiled. For a moment, the king and the queen disappeared. There was only Adrian and Elena, two survivors who had once dreamed about becoming untouchable, only to discover that being human meant no one ever truly was. Adrian placed the photograph back inside the drawer. Then he left the key on the desk. Elena noticed. You're really leaving it? Yes. No hidden copy? No. She raised an eyebrow. I'm impressed. Try not to sound surprised. They walked toward the elevator. Behind them waited the office where wars had been prevented and started, alliances created and destroyed, enemies forgiven and condemned. A room that once seemed like the center of the world. The elevator doors opened. Adrian stepped inside. Elena followed. Just before the doors closed, Adrian looked toward the office one last time. Then darkness covered it. They rode downward, floor by floor, past conference rooms, past private dining rooms, past offices filled with a new generation of leaders. No one knelt. No one gathered to mourn the end of an era. Work continued. Phones rang. People argued. Deals were discussed. Plans were made. The empire was alive without its king. Adrian smiled. Elena noticed. What? Daniel was right. About. It survived. The elevator reached the lobby. They walked outside. Rain had begun falling. For once, there were no cars waiting. No security surrounding them. No crowds. Just the city. Adrian opened an umbrella. Elena stepped beneath it. Together they walked toward the river. Behind them, Ember Tower disappeared into the rain. And somewhere in the city, people continued telling stories. Stories about a king who built an empire from nothing. Stories about a queen who seemed to know every secret before it was spoken. Stories about enemies who challenged them. Friends who betrayed them. Allies who remained. And a throne that eventually became less important than the people who had once fought to possess it. But if you listen carefully to stories like theirs, there is always another story beneath the legend. A warning. Power can protect you, but it can also convince you that everyone is an enemy. Success can free you, but it can also create a prison more comfortable than the one you escaped. Ambition can carry you beyond every expectation, but without purpose, it becomes a road that never ends. Trust can expose you to betrayal, yet refusing to trust anyone guarantees a different kind of defeat. And loyalty cannot survive forever on fear. People may obey fear. They may respect strength. They may admire success, but they remain loyal to something deeper. A belief, a purpose, a person who sees them as more than pieces on a board. Adrian learned that lesson from Elena. Elena learned from Adrian that shadows could protect a person but should never become their entire world. Daniel taught them that challenging a leader could sometimes be the greatest form of loyalty. Victor taught them what happened when recognition became more important than integrity. And Marcus Dane taught Adrian perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. The enemy who forces you to confront your weakness may accidentally become the person who saves your empire. Marcus tried to expose Adrian's vulnerabilities. He succeeded, but instead of destroying Adrian, those vulnerabilities forced him to change. That was the mistake Marcus never anticipated. He believed a king could only defend his throne. He never imagined a king might redefine what the throne meant. And that is why the king survived. Not because he was the strongest man in the city. Not because he frightened the most enemies. Not because he possessed the most money or controlled the most territory. He survived because, at the moment when pride could have destroyed everything, he still had enough wisdom to listen. And he had someone beside him courageous enough to speak. That may be the rarest kind of power. Not ruling alone. Not standing above everyone else. But having one person in the room who does not fear your crown. One person who remembers your name when the world only remembers your title. One person who can look at everything you have built and still ask whether you are becoming the thing you once hated. For Adrian Vale, that person was Elena Voss. His rival in intelligence. His partner in survival. His queen of shadows. And when the stories stripped away the money, the danger, the rumors, the empire, and the legend, perhaps that relationship was what remained. Not king and queen. Adrian and Elena. Two imperfect people. Two survivors. Two ambitious souls who learned that conquering a city was easier than conquering fear. And two rulers who discovered, before it was too late, that the greatest empire you can build is one that does not require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. This is Empire and Ember Stories. And if there is one truth worth carrying beyond the story of the king and his queen of shadows, remember this. A throne can make people notice you. Fear can make people obey you. Money can make people surround you. But none of those things can make people believe in you. That must be earned. Again and again. Especially when no one is powerful enough to force you to earn it. Because the true test of a king is not how he treats the enemy outside his gates. It is how he treats the people already standing inside them. The true test of a queen is not how many secrets she can uncover. It is whether she knows when truth is more valuable than secrecy. And the true test of an empire is not how difficult it is to destroy. It is whether the people within it still have a reason to protect it when the king is no longer watching. Adrian Vale eventually walked away from his throne. Elena Voss eventually stepped out of the shadows. The city continued without them. And that was not their defeat. It was proof that they had finally built something greater than their own names. Every empire ends. Every crown is eventually set down. Every ruler becomes a story. The only question is what remains after the final page. Fear? Ruins? Regret? Or something strong enough to keep burning after the people who first lit the flame are gone? For the king and his queen of shadows, the answer was written across a city that no longer needed them. An empire transformed. A legacy complicated by darkness, but not consumed by it. And somewhere beyond the towers, beyond the old neighborhoods, beyond all the legends people would continue exaggerating for generations, Adrian and Elena walked beneath the rain without guards, titles, or crowns. For the first time in years, they belonged only to themselves. Perhaps that was freedom. Perhaps that had been the kingdom they were searching for all along.